with governments, the private sector, and civil society across 3 continents. Civil society is vital to empowering public dialogue, promoting accountability, and ensuring the inclusion of underrepresented people. We engage with civil society through information, exchanging information about projects, policies, strategies, reports, and data. Accountability, monitoring environmental, social, and transparency concerns about EBRD-financed projects and performing independent reviews. Civil society organizations and people affected by our projects raise these concerns. Dialogue, facilitating dialogue between civil society and institutional leaders to share technical expertise and best practice. Consultations, consulting civil society on the EBRD's policies, strategies, and projects. Collaboration, strengthening the capacity of civil society through innovative technical cooperation programs. Partnerships, fostering partnerships with civil society to support effective project implementation and to multiply impact. To learn more about our work with civil society, visit www.ebrd.com or contact us. At the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, we work with governments, the private sector, and civil society across 3 continents. Civil society is vital to empowering public dialogue, promoting accountability, and ensuring the inclusion of underrepresented people. We engage with civil society through information, exchanging information about projects, policies, strategies, reports, and data. Accountability, monitoring environmental, social, and transparency concerns about EBRD-financed projects and performing independent reviews. Civil society organizations and people affected by our projects raise these concerns. Dialogue, facilitating dialogue between civil society and institutional leaders to share technical expertise and best practice. Consultations, consulting civil society on the EBRD's policies, strategies, and projects. Collaboration, strengthening the capacity of civil society through innovative technical cooperation programs. Partnerships, fostering partnerships with civil society to support effective project implementation and to multiply impact. To learn more about our work with civil society, visit
over 150 participants registered to participate at Civil Society Program event. Our program consists of 2 open panels, 2 dedicated sessions with civil society representatives, with the board and with the president, and special sessions with the bank's independent project accountability team, as well as evaluation department. And of course, there is opportunity to have meetings, individual meetings with our colleagues, and as well as a lot of networking opportunities. During these meetings, civil society colleagues will have opportunity as well to engage in constructive dialogue and present issues of concern, as well as to make recommendations on bank strategies and its operations. From stopping a destructive war, dealing with its consequences, and combating climate change, to addressing inequality and digitalization, we have many challenges ahead. While responding to these challenges, the bank is striving to be more thoughtful and strategic in its impact. Partnerships and stakeholder engagement, therefore, have become one of the central features of the EBRD's delivery model. We aim to create healthy engagement and vibrant societies through collaboration and by finding ways to develop and scale new and existing partnerships. For that reason, we as a civil society engagement team are looking forward in talking to you in person and are excited for stimulating discussions we have so far on many common challenges. Today's discussion at this panel will focus on how partnerships, coordination, and alignment between entities can foster new opportunities for growth, better impact, and the broader collaboration to make sure that no one is left behind. Now, without any further ado, I would like to introduce our moderator for today's panel, Ines, the Managing Director for Impact and Partnerships Group, part of Vice Presidency of Policy and Partnerships here at the EBRD. Ines has over 20 years of experience within the financial industry and capital markets, and most recently was heading the bank SME team as Director of Financial Products. Prior to joining the EBRD, Ines worked as an economist in the Central Bank of Portugal and in investment banking in London. Ines leads the EBRD's work on impact investing, transition impact and results management, working with private sector investors, donors, and philanthropic organizations. Ines, over to you.
Thank you so much, Elena. And before we start, I just have to give a huge thanks to Elena for all her energy and positivity, amidst the situation that we're in, and thank you for putting together such an incredible program that I'm sure everyone will enjoy. So thank you, Elena. Thank you so much. I would like to start then with, we have here with us our panel, and we'll start also with some questions. Just starting with just introducing Payal Dalal, you're Senior VP for Social Impact International Markets at Mastercard Center for Inclusive Growth. We have, Saled Sahid from Disasters Emergency Committee, and at the end, Nikki Monge, Country Director for Uxman, and finally, Nora Salim, Executive Director at the Suarez Foundation for Social Development. So it's really a pleasure to have you with us today. So I will start with my first question for you, Nikki. Now, following the turmoil of the coronavirus pandemic and restrictions, we now find ourselves, unfortunately, amidst a new crisis, the war on Ukraine, besides many other conflicts around the world, which you're very familiar with, and has an experienced civil society professional. Could you tell us a bit more what is civil society's unique value proposition in responding to the current multiple challenges?
Thanks, Ines, and thank you very much also to EBRD for having the panel on civil society. It's fantastic to have that engagement from IFIs. To respond to your question, I think it can be looked in the terms of two lenses, two ways. The practical and the strategic. Practically, when a crisis happens, whether it's COVID or a hurricane or a war, civil society is the first responder typically, unless the crisis is so worse that everything they themselves are victim. But often they are first responders. They provide life-saving, immediate assistance to people in need. We've seen those images when Ukraine crisis hit, of folks driving all the way from Germany into Poland and elsewhere, opening their homes for refugees as they were fleeing. We've seen images in Lampedusa and other parts of Italy and elsewhere. We've seen in the country where I'm posted, in Jordan, which hosts significantly larger number of refugees, more than the per capita higher number of refugees than any other country in the world. There are the first responders, people who are right there to provide assistance. They understand the local context. They understand the local market. They know how to get relief organized and key needs met. But more strategically, civil society's added value proposition lies in its ability to hold duty bearers to account, to collect data, to collect information that governments either won't or can't release for a number of reasons, to provide that independent assessment to those in the international community and decision makers to make an impact, and to be a critical friend to those in power, like EBRD, to hold private sector to account, to hold themselves to account. So I think between the practical and strategic, you have those values that ensure that international humanitarian law and human rights law is respected.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. It's very, very important words there. And Saleh, moving on to you, the DEC, the Disaster Emergency Committee, which is mobilising UK leading charities and launches collective appeals to raise funds to provide emergency aid and disasters humanitarian crisis around the world, and in particular also the war in Ukraine. Why do you think it's important to align efforts and act collectively in these times of crisis?
Thank you, Ines, and thank you to EBRD for putting on this wonderful event and conference, particularly as we're all just emerging out of COVID, so huge thanks to all the organisers. And I also want to say, really delighted to be the only male amongst an illustrious female panel. For once, I'm actually delighted I'm in the minority. So just a little bit about the DEC, the Disaster Emergency Committee. It's a partnership of charity organisations, INGOs, like Oxfam, Save the Children and Red Cross, and also a partnership of media in the UK, the likes of BBC, Sky and ITV, and a partnership of private sector, the corporates and private enterprise in that sense. And ultimately, it's also a partnership of the UK public. We all come together during a major emergency crisis, such as we're now seeing in Ukraine. It can often feel, for many people watching screens and watching war unfold, or indeed a natural disaster, people feel a sense of helplessness. And through the work of the DEC and the partnership we bring together, we can relieve that by saying, this is how you can help. But it's also a partnership in making sure that those funds that we raise in the UK are spent effectively and efficiently through the experts and the local partners and the first responders on the ground. Now let's just very briefly also look in the space that we all find ourselves at the moment. Sadly, the world is yet to emerge from the first C, COVID. We're in a state of conflict almost in many countries of the world. Yemen, my place of birth, Syria, Horn of Africa suffering from conflict. Then we have climate change. Then we also have now the cost of living, which is affecting not only, of course, us here in Europe, but elsewhere. All this is impacting on global hunger of a scale that we've not seen before. So when it comes to partnerships and collaboration, it's absolutely critical and essential that we do it, not just for the sake of those communities that find themselves in crisis, but for our sakes as well, living in relative prosperity and safety. Because war, conflict, crisis can hit any of us, as we've now seen in Ukraine. So simply put, partnerships for us and collaboration is ensuring that people understand their roles, understand how to respond, and understand what they will also get out of it. It's not simply giving a handout to those who find themselves in crisis, but giving with dignity, but also helping rebuild lives. So that's, for us, what partnership means as a Disasters Emergency Committee. And I was really delighted this morning, listening to the donor meeting this morning, how EBRD are dealing with partnerships. I think it's a perfect example of how you reach out to organizations and invest in partnerships so that you build on the strengths of those individual partners and ultimately deliver strong, effective work wherever it's needed. Thank you, Ines.
Thank you. And Pyle, just moving just to you, the MasterCard Centre for Inclusive Growth is a social impact arm of MasterCard. So how do you partner with civil society, government, other private sector institutions to scale up inclusive growth? And has your approach changed as well during the pandemic, and the current crisis?
Thank you very much, and thank you again for organizing such an important and critical conversation. I couldn't agree more that partnerships are critical. I think the key is how we partner. And so if I think about how we approach partnerships, it's really about trust, it's about transparency, and it's about making sure that we harness the full complement of resources and competencies. And so that's why when we do partnerships at the center, we really think about financial contributions plus. So not only are we providing philanthropic funding, we're also looking at ways to leverage our technology, our human capital, our aggregated anonymized data. And to your question on whether our approach to partnerships has evolved since the pandemic? I'd say no, but the urgency has, right? We're not only coming out post-pandemic, but there's the invasion of Ukraine. And the approach we're taking is very much about how do we work with other private sector entities to form private partnerships for social impact. So how can we catalyze our collective assets and resources to really push through sustainable and scalable social impact? So just a quick example, one of the things that we're working on is digitizing wages of garment workers in Bangladesh, Egypt, and Cambodia. Now, this is really good at the worker level because most garment workers are women, so there's a women's economic empowerment component, there's a financial security and resilience component, there's also a security component. And on the factory side, it's better for efficiency, and for the brands, it's much better for transparency and those brands who care about worker well-being. So what we're doing with partners like Levi Strauss and their suppliers and factories is we're actually working with the garment workers and taking their payroll and transitioning them from cash to digital. And we're doing this with an Egyptian bank, we're doing this with Levi's and their factories, and we're doing this with local NGOs to make sure that the transition from cash to digital is a smooth one that really does improve outcomes around women's economic empowerment, improved savings, and more financial resilience. And without the partnership of Levi's and the factories who gave the workers the time off, without CIB in Egypt who actually helped create the payroll cards, and without our local NGOs, we wouldn't have been able to take this to scale. And we've already gotten, in our pilot program, 10,000 women fully digitized.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much. And moving to you, Noura. Swahirs was one of the very first philanthropic organizations in Egypt. So, in your view, what are the challenges civil society face, and what insight has the foundation gathered from investing in the capacity building in civil society organizations across Egypt, but more generally also in the MENA region?
Thank you very much, and thank you to EBRD for having me, especially for having this event, I think, at such a turbulent time. Can you hear me? I think, yes, okay, great. So to your question, I would like to first perhaps make the distinction that, not all civil society is equal. And, in a very simplistic manner, I want to distinguish between, traditional charities that I think are very prevalent in our part of the world especially, development organizations with different sectorial focuses, be it, youth employment, education, health, and rights-based organizations in the region, because I think that, the enabling environment and the regulations and the challenges and opportunities that exist for them are very different, with perhaps traditional charities being on the better positioned end of the sphere and rights-based organization perhaps having the most challenges. But at a high level, I would say that, the legislative regulatory environment is a challenging one for CSOs. And I see that across the regions, there's always this balance of we need civil society organizations. As Nikki said, they're always first responders. We see, and in the example of Egypt, during COVID, CSOs really stepped up in terms of their support to civilians, cash transfers, health needs, et cetera. But also, this concern around CSOs and their agendas. And looking specifically again at the case of Egypt, I'm happy to say that at least, with our new NGO law, and this is something that has changed, we had one, there are a lot of conversations happening with civil society, with government, and at least resulted in, I think, a much better place in terms of a new NGO law that tends to have this balance between regulation and security, which we understand, but also space and autonomy for CSOs and effective and efficient CSOs to be able to operate. So that's number one. The second, and I think a number of us have touched on this, is data availability in general, and transparency and accountability that I think are very important pillars when we talk about trust, which is a key word for CSOs. And so on both sides, I think, governments availing data to civil society organizations to ensure that they're able to better plan, better operate is something that is vital. And then, but also from CSO's standpoint, CSOs themselves investing in gathering data and being a lot more transparent in publishing I think is something that is very important for CSOs to think very seriously about. Again, I understand, I don't want to simplify the matter. I understand the complexities that perhaps also face civil society organizations that don't lead to this, great transparency. But I think if we want to enable trust between government, private sector, CSOs, then across these, 3 pillars, there needs to be a lot more sharing and a lot more publication. To your question on insights, I just want to, leave with 2 insights. I think one, when we think about resilience and capacity building of CSOs, it's very difficult to do that without donors providing unrestricted funding. So a lot of the funding that is in this space, and we're a donor organization, we're a grant-making organization, we're guilty of that, we're changing that. But how do you expect CSOs to invest in their resilience over long term if you are giving short-term restricted funding for activities, right? So, an example that for me I found quite effective was, Ford Foundation's BUILD program. And at Savitas Foundation, we're basically putting forward a program that is quite similar for high potential NGOs to purely invest in a very unrestricted manner in what they see they need to become resilient organizations. And then the second and last point is the importance of investing in rigorous impact assessments, because I think, again, as a sector, and particularly with traditional charities being much more historic, I think really understanding and operating in a manner that says development is a science. It's not just about good intentions. As grant makers, we need to be okay to invest a lot of funds and time in, whether it's randomized control trials or other mechanisms of rigorous impact assessment, but it's really important to be working off of an evidence-based, CSOs, donors, government, regardless of the pressures that we operate in. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think a lot of those themes resonate as well with you, with our own donors on the other side in terms of monitoring and data collection. So thank you so much for this important insight. Payal, let's focus a little bit more on partnerships, and you talked about transformative partnerships between sectors. Can you share a few more examples of these transformative partnerships, and how are you approaching scale and sustainability?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me talk about 2. The first is a focus on helping micro and small businesses around the world. What we've seen in the pandemic is that resilience is actually the key. We want to think about growth outcomes, but first you have to make sure that micro and small businesses are able to weather volatility. And so we decided to support micro and small businesses in the MENA region a few years ago. And so we partnered with Mercy Corps to bring a digital platform called Micro Mentor to a number of countries, including here in Morocco, Jordan, Saudi, Lebanon. And what Micro Mentor is, it's a digital platform that allows a micro business to come on and say, here's a problem I have, here's a challenge I'm trying to address. And then another micro business will come and say, okay, here's how I addressed it. Now, we know that peer-to-peer is a lot more effective than top-down. And so what we did is we built this digital platform that enabled micro businesses to connect with each other, and so that they could get just-in-time support. It wasn't this long mentoring relationship. It was, I need help with the cybersecurity problem, and another business saying, okay, here's how I've done it. So we launched that in Jordan with the Jordan government there. And then we partnered with the EBRD. And what was amazing with the EBRD was that they were able to bring their portfolio of financial institutions into the mix so that we could really expand the scale of the program. And then we were able to crowd in Google.org, who was able to help us further scale the program. So I think it shows that when you've got funders and partners that are mission aligned and are also very transparent about the outcomes they're trying to achieve in terms of resilience, growth, digitization, you can really create that collective impact. And then the second example I'll just share, Ines, is something that we're working on together with the EBRD, and that's, of course, there are huge ramifications from the invasion of Ukraine. And so MasterCard, as soon as the crisis hit, announced $2 million of relief funding to the Red Cross and Save the Children to help with the immediate relief needs. And then we further announced another $3 million to support local NGOs with their relief efforts, because to the points made previously, local NGOs are the first responders, and they're going to be the ones that stay long after the global NGOs go. And we've also put aside money to help with displaced Ukrainians reestablish their economic livelihoods. And so that's the partnership we announced yesterday on social media with the EBRD, and that's that we're partnering together with the EBRD to really help displaced Ukrainian women reestablish their livelihoods in Romania. So again, it's a great story of collective action, alignment of outcomes, and ensuring that there's not replication and duplication, but that really we're bringing together the full complement of our assets for a transformative partnership.
Wonderful, and thank you so much for sharing these examples. You know, I think it's just great that we're seeing this not just flourishing, and you know, Micromint is almost very familiar with the program. It's been a fantastic collaboration. Nikki, I mean, Oxfam is responding to more than 25 emergencies worldwide, and collaboration is really at the heart of your intervention. And so, how do you scale up partnerships to help people rebuild their communities in these emergencies?
I think scaling up is a question of finding folks, organizations with whom you share your values and your vision. So that's perhaps the prerequisite for collaboration. And there are a number of ways that scaling up happens. There's a very instrumental way, which is transfer of funds. As a confederation, we are able to access global markets and comply with back donor requirements that are often very complicated and technical, with a huge transaction cost, which often small organizations or local organizations are unable to deal with it. Then there's the whole politics of language. Our sector speaks specific language. We have KPIs, we have indicators, we have log frames. We have, in a sense, technicalized humanitarian assistance to the point that it requires certain level of professionalism. We come in at that point because we would want to do that work to ensure that A, there's accountability, where accountability is needed and required, but B, more importantly, people who are in the front line are able to release themselves from that role of compliance and thinking through, and are able to push ahead. At the same time, providing technical support on range of issues, from water sanitations to blockchains to safety and security to occupational health hazards, which is often the last thing that humanitarian personnel on the front lines look after or think about. Then there's, of course, the bigger issue in terms of scale-up is often conflicts are political at the end of the day. And while we can continue to provide humanitarian assistance, a bigger piece of work, which is, depending upon the context, the divided communities, the divisiveness in the country or in the region itself that needs to be addressed, and local organizations are far better placed. But for Oxfam, we see the role rather complementary between international agencies and local agencies. It's not an either-or game, it's an and game, where there are some things we cannot say as an international agency because we are not from the country. But we can definitely speak to our governments who have a role in those countries, either through providing financing or supporting the local government. We can influence the choices they make. At the same time, local organizations are better equipped to say things that we can't say to their own government. So it's a game that we all play, but with the end goal being that we are able to protect the rights of those who are the most affected, and the civilians in times of crises have life and liberty protected. That guarantee is there, the right to life and liberty. And that being said, I think the bigger role is, of course, of seeing how we give way to local organizations, how we share power. Because when you really look down to the politics of humanitarian assistance and development cooperation, there is the unevenness in terms of access to information, knowledge, and the rules of the game with internationally operating organizations such as mine and local organizations. And I think the answer lies for us in stepping aside when we know that local organizations are the right people to speak their own voice and articulate their aspirations to their government or to the international community. As we speak, Brussels 6 is ongoing. We know in 21st century, crises have a lifespan of anything between 18 to 22 years. This is a decade-over Syria crisis. And as we are speaking in Brussels, it is our local partners from Jordan and Lebanon and Syrian refugee organizations from Turkey who are speaking to the European Union and not necessarily organizations like ours. So I guess it is really the issue of complementarity, acknowledgement of power and the role it plays, and being very self-aware that impact can only happen when we are able to leverage each other's strengths rather than, take each other's place or vie for that.
Thank you. And Saleh, DEC is an umbrella NGO, and in your view, what are the main challenges of this multi-stakeholder partnerships, and how do you make your partnership within DEC, agile, flexible, and creative as well, to deal with emergencies?
Sure. I'll talk from a sort of a disaster response perspective, based in the UK, and obviously responding to global emergencies overseas. And I think actually there's probably nothing better in terms of focusing minds and focusing partnerships, in a humanitarian emergency. And if organizations aren't involved in those kind of responses, I think they really need to question themselves in that sense. But for us, the large-scale unmet humanitarian need that many countries are facing around the world, coupled with a sense of, or lack of awareness from the rest of the globe, and particularly in areas I mentioned before, whether that be Yemen or the Horn of Africa or elsewhere. And I think these are key challenges. And then when donors do come in, often it is late, and the media plays a big role. And I think, the Ukraine response is actually an ideal response in terms of how the media has responded to this, how the Ukrainian authorities have responded to this, and how globally the world has responded to this. And I think we should use the Ukraine as an example of how to respond in partnership with agility and with flexibility elsewhere around the world. And according to Noura's point around flexibility, I think in order to remain agile to the changing conditions on the ground, wherever that may be, donors need to understand that those funds need to be flexible. And certainly that's where the DEC stands, and that's where we encourage our own donors into humanitarian response to make sure the funds are unrestricted. And moving on just to the point I made earlier around clarity of roles and planning. I think it's too late to wait for an emergency or a disaster or even in a development setting. I think that effective planning, agreements beforehand, understanding and having clarity of roles is critical to any response, and making sure that there is freedoms to remain agile during that response to make sure there is an effective response. And also, regardless of how much planning you do, we're all humans and things don't always go to plan. And I think the point that was made earlier around trust is so important, building those relationships so that you can change and you learn from those changes, so that when there's a future response, you can actually adapt and make the future programs appropriate for that. So for me, I think it's coordination, collaboration, continuous learning, which will build trust and hopefully an effective response.
Thank you. So you think we're getting better at, you mentioned the Ukrainian example, you think we are getting better at addressing these emergencies and being agile?
I certainly do, and I think that the media plays a huge role in this. When we look at the role of the media in terms of the coverage of the Ukraine crisis, that has mobilized not only the private sector, but also the public all around the world. Yeah. This in turn has raised huge amounts of funds, quite rightly, and it's not that the Ukraine crisis is overfunded, it's the opposite. It's all the other crises around the world that are underfunded. And using, as I said, the Ukraine example of saying, how can we all use the partnership, use collaboration and coordination, is actually the right template to go forward for other crises around the world. It's a shame that globally, that it's had to wait for the crisis in Ukraine to happen for us to learn some of those lessons. And I hope we will learn those lessons when eventually peace does come to Ukraine and Ukraine is able, obviously, to rebuild and reform.
Thank you, Saleh. Noura, one more question to you as well on the topic of partnerships. So the Swahiris Foundation and EBRD have been working together since 2019, supporting improving skill development, work-based learning opportunities for young people in Egypt, and the expansion of the Swahiris Hospitality School in El Gouna in Egypt. So in your view, what are the challenges of the partnership between a national philanthropy, and it's good we make the link also to Nikki of people somewhat local, and the multinational development bank, and how do you overcome some of these challenges?
So I think I would say that, and Nikki touched on this, it's first sort of an alignment on mission and vision. And so I think that, early on, you can tell whether, this would be a right partner. Are you aligned on your mission and vision? And so I think with us and with EBRD, this was clear, the interest in youth employment, and particularly in vocational training, and a vital sector in Egypt, which is hospitality. The challenge, I think, in partnerships in general, and this was also the case with our partnership with EBRD, is accepting that when you partner, it will take you longer. But it is a belief of both organizations that you will go further, as the saying goes. And so, being resilient, and I think, thankfully, as civil society, we're sort of built to be resilient. So just understanding that it will take time, having the team sort of resolve through the processes, which are definitely there, because of their belief in the greater impact of this partnership beyond what each individual would do alone. And I'm very thankful, and as an organization, we're very thankful that, an international financial institution does truly see and believe in the power of having a local partner. And beyond the challenge, I think there was a great opportunity where we brought in our deep local expertise, the fact that we already have an existing, hospitality school that operates in a very important sector, that actually does, employ youth, that is set with, the German dual model that works very well. With EBRD's, global technical expertise, technical support, it's not just a partnership around, co-funding, but it is a partnership that leverages, the different strengths that we both bring in. And I think this is, was a unique experience for us. I think was a unique experience in the Egyptian context for EBRD, and has, I think, proven to be quite successful. And so I hope that, this inspires other IFIs and also other, local donor organizations to see the value despite the challenges. And finally, I think one point, and perhaps this is one of the reasons why I really like, amongst other, the SDGs, is that it provides this common language. And so I think having something like the Sustainable Development Goals, where organizations such as EBRD, look at very closely, where the entire development sector kind of, understands, looks at, operates with, brought us together. Both, the SDG on partnerships, but in general, just, the other SDGs and the understanding that together we can do more.
No, thank you, and definitely, SDGs is recognized as one of the common languages, and also within EBRD, we're doing some work to sort of map what we do into the Sustainable Development Goals. I wanted, before we opened the floor for questions, I wanted just to get a bit more of the insights of this, great panel, and just start to say, what are the key takeaways, and, what would be your one action point? And maybe I start with you, Payal. Yeah.
Sure. So I think we all agree that partnerships are key. I think it's all about the how. I think it's about leveraging collective assets and really recognizing what we're best at individually. I think the private sector is very good at innovation and speed. I think government's very good at having the scale. I think civil society is really excellent on having the trust on the local level. And so if we partner together, I think we can go far, wide, fast, and deep. And so it's really a question of how do we do that collectively.
Yeah, I think for me, it was really about the power of collaboration and the power of coordination. And ensuring that actually we seek, and certainly from the DEC perspective, we're always continuously seeking new partnerships and identifying where the gaps are, and ensuring that we bring people into that partnership so that those individuals or those organizations in the partnership can build on their strengths and respond accordingly. So my takeaway is to ensure that we continue to seek those partnerships and strengthen collaboration.
Maybe over to you, Noor.
Yeah, so I think I took a lot from the very inspiring colleagues sitting next to me, but primarily I really like the point that Nikki made and everyone else made around local organizations and much more of the community-based organizations, and I think both, not just taking the time to listen to them and understand, a lot of times development is very, and even as we look at us, it's very sort of top-down.
Yeah.
And for me, I think it's vital as we think of emergency response, as we look at what's happening and our roles in our individual organizations, to ensure that you are listening at a much deeper level and to bring grassroots organizations to forums such as the one we're in and others in engaging with government and engaging with private sector, because I think sometimes that voice gets a bit lost, and we tend to be very donor-driven and very foreign-driven. And recognizing that in Egypt, when we go, on the ground, when we listen to the locals, their needs, what they think, is right versus sort of dictating this top down, I think is just something that I personally would like Sawiris Foundation to invest more in, and that I would like to see happening amongst, all players in whether IFIs or the larger civil society space.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And finally, Nikki.
Thanks. It's always delightful to be the last one to answer this question when everybody's had their say. So I'd say what she said, he said, and he said. But I think just to say leaving no one behind requires improved coordination and huge amount of self-awareness amongst all of us in the development and humanitarian sector. That improved coordination remains the key. I remember this incident post-tsunami response when we were torpedoed there for the first humanitarian assessment. We met fishermen who had 4 or 5 fiber boats. Fiber boats, yeah? One with the logo of Oxfam, another logo of World Vision, another with the logo of... And they were like, yeah, okay, but, children need to go to school, we need to pay electricity, this needs to be repaired, thank you very much for these lovely boats, but we have many other things to do. Yeah. And yet, again, I think for everybody who has been in the sector, coordination remains the key, and informed coordination, better informed actors and stakeholders, whether they are civil society organizations, local, international, whether they're governments, whether they're international community, UN agencies. It's important that coordination happens. For that, my key takeaway remains is improved preparation. We have to be risk-ready, disaster-ready in that sense. You can't pick up a phone now when the crisis is ongoing and start asking for information and creating pathways. So DEC has taught us any lesson. It's get your house in order way before disaster strikes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki. Excellent. We have a few minutes left, and I would like to open the floor for questions. If you could then state your name, and if you want to direct the question for someone, do we have like a microphone? So I can see here at the front. There's one at the front and then at the back. So we'll go first at the front and then at the back. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the great panel and the panelists. All the points were very, very valuable. I represent a women entrepreneurship NGO from Turkey. We work with EBRD quite for a long time, and we definitely believe that to create change, the civil society, private sector, and public sector should be working in cooperation. But adding up to that, we also believe that academia and international organizations like UN agencies, ILO, and the others, they should also be added to the loop. And I would ask the panelists their idea about this, making a bigger loop with adding think tanks, academia, international organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Should we? Maybe we can take a couple of questions and then go back to the panel. I can see on the back there's a gentleman.
My name is Mark Fedor. Thank you for giving me the microphone. I'm with the Coalition for Human Rights and Development, and I'd like to build actually on something that Noura was saying that very much lives up to our own philosophy of being driven from the bottom up. When you're talking about development, who is development for? How, and listening to what's coming from the grassroots. Now, the EBRD operates, and this is, to the panel, a question. The EBRD operates, its main countries of operation are Egypt and Turkey. Countries where there are serious restrictions on civil society, where people feel intimidated to actually raise their voice about issues they might have, problems they might have, which actually are voices that are important for the development agencies to hear, because those will help ensure that those projects are going to be working well. So the question with a bank that has these two countries as sort of main areas of investment, a bank that has leverage through that, what would you like to see the EBRD doing? How would you like to see the EBRD use its leverage on this issue of the restricted space and the rights issues that come up around that, and making sure that people are able to raise their voice when there are projects that might be causing them concerns? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll take that. I don't know, anyone in particular who wants to take the question on, in sort of think tanks and academia? Yeah,
I can. So,
yeah.
so I'd say from the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth perspective, we partner a lot with think tanks and academics. One of the things that we do with academics is evaluation. So really understanding the impact of our work. We have done randomized control trials. I think the other opportunity for further collaboration is just sharing best practice. I find as a development sector, we're very fragmented and sometimes a bit territorial with the information we have. And so I think there's a real opportunity not only for think tanks and academics, but the UN agencies as well, to facilitate these really honest conversations about what's working, but what's not working. Because that's what no one wants to admit to, but that's what we need to get to the bottom of to really be able to galvanize social impact.
And something you want to add? Yeah.
I just want to add, obviously in terms of research and so forth, it's so critical and so important. But I also want to explain that it's important that any partnership also engages the partners at the right level with the right level of communication. Because ultimately, I think many partnerships fail when too many people are involved in too many different things. And that actually results in just weak response or weak partnerships. So I definitely agree in terms of making sure that those organizations that you mentioned are part of it, but engaging them at the right level at the right time, that I think will build effectiveness and make sure that you get the most out of the partnership. That's certainly been my experience.
Thank you. Yeah, Noor, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And I think we fundamentally, as a donor, also believe very strongly in working with academia and think tanks, and we see them as part of that, spectrum of stakeholders. Particularly, to Payal's point on investing in, research publications and having those technical expertise. And I just want to give one example of, we have been very grateful in our partnership with the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, based out of MIT and working globally. And we've run a number of randomized controlled trials, with the support of researchers there. And I don't think we would have been able to either implement its very sophisticated design that I don't think we had this, the expertise, or that civil society had the expertise to conduct alone. But then also having, this research being published independent of the CSOs and by researchers, I think gives it a lot more credibility. And so has been a very significant experience for us that took a lot of time, took a lot of money, but I think was very worthwhile.
And just to add that we did the coordination, formalized humanitarian coordination systems. I'm sure you're familiar with them, the humanitarian country team, the humanitarian development partners team. These are all part of the global humanitarian coordination structures that include all the UN country team directors, from UNICEF to ILO to IOM to everybody else. And then you, of course, have the INGOs and local organizations. If it works well, that's the way it should go. But I think that the think tanks and academia, there have been a symbiotic relationship between the sector and them. So if you look at even the concept of gender that we are grateful for the feminists to bring into our sector, it was born from that understanding of what was missing, including the whole most recent development of Global Compact for Refugees. If you look at the importance of refugee studies, the conceptual analytical development in our sectors from social protection to cash assistance, we have a lot to thank the academia for, because we've all sort of implemented one thing after the other, and we've run from, and I'm sure you're aware, from one project to another, intervention to another. And the time for learning and reflection and to step back and to look at have the bird's eye view to see what is actually happening, that is where the added value and partnership with the think tanks come in. And they give us the wings to soar further, really. So I think it's the more intentionally going about it is perhaps needed, because that serendipitous collaboration has always been there.
Thank you so much. And just on the second question, and thank you so much for the gentleman to raise. So what is it that we, as EBRD can do to listen more, to make sure we're leaving no one behind? And so in your view, any advice, insights that we can get?
I can take that. I think, as I said earlier, that we need to have this collaborative relationship, and it is a bit of knowing where where we can leverage each other's partnership. And one of the beauty of partnership is that we can be, for the lack of a better word, a good cop and bad cop when it is required in the context we are in. Yes, it's not possible in some countries and in some situations to speak out, because you have to make a political choice and a strategic one. Do I want to be a cowboy and get closed down, and do I want to keep quiet now and continue working? And I think it's always choosing the battle and the war. And that's where, if you have partners like EBRD or the donors, that's where we would go to say to them, when you have bilateral conversations with the government, when this government comes on the table and you're negotiating an aid deal with them, we would encourage you to raise this issue or that. We would ask you to point for that regulatory reform. I think that's where the collaborative, the partnership comes in, really. Because, yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's a choice also for each of us to say, do we speak out and shut down and make a point? Because that can be, in some instances, powerful signal for everybody else to act. In others, it might be perhaps, choosing a battle and war.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki. I think there was another question in the middle. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Hello. It's more observation and recommendation than question. I'm not coming from Bosnia and Herzegovina. It's in Balkans. International community made every single mistake that they were able to make at my region. So 30 years after the war, we are still a fragile region. So please learn from us and do not repeat mistakes in Ukraine. Please do not help women with 2,000 or 5,000 euros to start their companies, because they will not be able to start companies with 2,000 or 5,000 euros. Are you able to start with that money in your country, proper company? Do not give us beehives and cows. There are engineers, females. We need, maybe some of us need 50,000 euros to start a company. And while engaging with local CSOs, do not squeeze them to send you 10,000 pages for 8,000 euros support. Yeah. So please make a partnership with people on the ground and have a trust in them. They know what they need. You just please listen to them and work with them. And I was working on return and reconstruction task force. I remember we were reconstructing houses in December and January when it was freezing, because the owner needed to finish everything by February, while constructing season is starting in March. So please be more flexible and listen and trust people on the ground. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. A question as well. Next, thank you. I think we'll have just time for just a more couple of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Christina, and I'm from Ukraine. And I work for CE Bank Watch Network. I very much back what Amna was just saying. And I very much back what you were saying, that CSOs are the fast responders to the issues, crises like the war in Ukraine. And I would even go further and say that without civil society and without active communities, the democracy would have been defeated in Ukraine because of the Russian invasion. So the role of the CSOs is very strong, but as we are still being in the defense mode, we have to think about reconstruction. And it will require a different set of skills, different set of partnerships, different sets maybe of people. So how do we make sure that this process of reconstructions will be inclusive, that it will include the communities, and that we basically learn the lessons from the reconstruction in the Balkans? Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer that. Yeah, Sally, I was thinking maybe you could.
I was really inspired this morning. Can you hear me? I was really inspired this morning when I was at the donors meeting and listening.
Yeah, I think they'll.
Hello? Can you hear me now? Thank you. Okay. So I was really inspired this morning in the donors meeting, listening to the mayors of Lviv and Kyiv, and also the Prime Minister of Ukraine. And absolutely inspirational that in the state of war, state of conflict, where they're having to clearly defend their homeland, that they are talking about reconstruction, they're talking about being prepared, making sure that services remain and so forth. And believe me, this is not the usual. Normally in a state of conflict, countries are forgetting about a reconstruction and so forth. So I think we're almost there, we're halfway there when you have a very active government, active authorities and active people in Ukraine and neighboring countries that are really thinking forward and thinking about reconstruction. So it does make, I think, I'm sure Nikki would agree with this, it makes the life of humanitarian organizations, international development organizations, and obviously stakeholders, including banks and so forth, to partner with civil society, with government and other authorities to make sure, not only, as the lady said there, that we're listening, but we're also starting early and not waiting for things to happen. So again, I come back to my point earlier. I think this is, in a strange way, a perfect template in terms of how we all globally respond and have strong partnerships. Thank you.
And I think just to add to the point, I mean, the fact that you articulated that so well, the fact that many of us are looking at the civil society, not just in Ukraine, but also in Poland, Romania, and Moldova. Oxfam itself has decided the contribution, it will take lesser contribution from the funds that have been raised for disaster emergency relief, and it will step aside to ensure that funding flows to local organizations in the 3 countries, the reception countries, and we have one single partner in Poland that's delivering assistance in Moldova and Romania as well, in addition to Poland. So in that itself, the awareness of the civil society, that there are lessons that have been learned, the sophistication and the maturity to be on the table when donors come in and when government sits down to chalk out the plans, that is where already you're far ahead. And I think that's perhaps a saving grace and was also the hope for all of us to be the template for any future reconstruction and recovery effort.
Thank you. And we're now running out of time. I think there was just one question we can take, final one. This gentleman here. Oh, we can take.
I think it is fine.
And then we'll conclude. Yes.
Merci, je vais parler français. Je suis Saïd Kamel de l'Association des populations des montagnes du monde, section Maroc. Et nous faisons partie de la coalition Arab Watch. Je voudrais poser le problème de l'impact des changements climatiques sur les populations. Et il y a des populations qui souffrent beaucoup, comme le cas des guerres et des catastrophes naturelles. Ce que je recommande à la banque, c'est qu'ils tiennent compte de ces populations. Parce que quand il y a la saison des cultures, ils mettent tout ce qu'ils ont sous la terre, et la pluie n'est plus au rendez-vous, alors un an après, ils sont dans la misère et ils souffrent beaucoup. Donc moi, je recommande à ce qu'ils tiennent compte de ce problème, surtout dans les zones montagneuses. Deuxième question. Vous savez que le partenariat société civile, secteur privé et gouvernement, il y a 2 types de sociétés civiles. Il y a des sociétés civiles internationales, mais il y a des sociétés civiles locales. Et il y a 2 types d'ONG locales, ceux qui sont pro-gouvernementales, surtout dans les pays non démocratiques en voie de démocratisation, et il y a la société civile qui milite dans ces problèmes qui dérangent. Alors, et vous savez que les moyens, c'est une société civile qui n'a pas les moyens, ne peut pas faire son travail comme il faut, et dans ces pays, ils n'arrivent pas à trouver les financements. Alors, ce que je recommande à la banque, à ce qu'ils fassent attention à ce problème, à ce qu'ils aident ce type de société civile qui agissent pour le bien de tous. Et merci.
Ok, merci. Je vais peut-être traduire parce que je ne sais pas si tout le monde a pris. So the first question was how do we incorporate climate change into in the impact on local population, and I can tell you actually EBRD has a policy of at least half of its investments by 2025, and in fact we've done it already last year, that are green. So climate and worries about climate change is very much part of the work that we do, and I am sure the panelists as well would have worked on this. Yeah, Noor, do you want to just add?
Yes, thank you very much. Just on the first question, I wanted to add that I think, and from an Egypt perspective, I'm very happy that COP27 will be hosted in Egypt in November, because I think this brings the conversation that has been happening globally and not so much in the MENA region and in the African region to that part of the world. And I see already that it's making the government of Egypt and everyone around just engage very quickly on climate change, what can we do, and being much more open to all topics around green economy and resilience. I would say, and again, that is an Egyptian view, but I think largely a MENA view, that as CSOs, climate change has sort of been on the backseat. It has been, we have been seeing it as, a problem of the privileged. It's not our problem. We're going to deal with poverty. We're going to deal with, poor quality education, with health issues, and we'll leave the climate to the developed world. And obviously that is a very dangerous perspective to have. But again, I think that investing, even as I look at COP27, and in Egypt, what we're doing is we are engaging in a lot of, content roundtables for civil societies to understand, because this is a language that's also happening at IFI levels, UN level, and no one on the ground, none of the CSOs understand what people are saying when you're talking green economy, when you're they really don't understand it. And so I think donors need to really invest in bringing civil society and others along into that conversation and investing in this building of content. And then civil society needs to see that this is something that really matters to our part of the world, and we need to start engaging in whatever role each one of us will play with international organizations to protect our countries, our planet, for our people. It cannot be a developed country level, developed world conversation. And so, I'm happy and proud that it's, happening in Egypt. I really hope that it translates into actual change in our part of the world on climate change, which we are very far behind on.
Thank you, Noura. And I'm afraid, we've run out of time. So I hope that you found, as I did, an interesting, very thought-provoking discussion. I would like to thank our guests, Payal Dalal, Noura Salim, Niki Monga, and Saled Saeed, for their unique perspective, insightful perspectives, and of course, time to be here with us. And thank you for each of you to demonstrate the power of partnerships and challenging, and ultimately how this can be transformational, improving outcomes in communities, and leaving no one behind, and helping to formulate our interventions. And the impact of conflicts and shocks, such as devastating events in Ukraine, but also other war-afflicted countries, as Nick is very much aware as well, compounds fragility. And we need to respond to communities demanding change. We need to listen as well. We need to bring civil society. We need to bring local players. And we at EBRD look forward not only to working more with each one of you and your respective organizations, but also to learn, to listen, to learn about how better to achieve our mutual aspirations. And thank you so much for the audience and for your questions. Yes, and we have, this is our illustrator that, summed up, the discussion we've had. So, it's a very impressive summary of it. And I would like also to invite you all to a small CSO reception, which follows now, which is in Foyer Kutubia, which is located close by between event rooms FES 1 and FES and FES 2. So thank you so much, and we leave you with this great picture of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.